I'm doing everyone. Hope you're having a nice day. We're having a nice, sunny, clear but cold day here today. So I hope you're enjoying your day. Our family back home is celebrating the Eagles' victory, so that's kind of cool. But on to bigger things. Have you ever been in a situation where you were anticipating um, something happening between you and another person? They're not going to be happy, or at least that's what you're anticipating, and in your mind, you build it all up and you pretty much see, disaster coming between you and the other person or persons or whatever. I hope you know what I'm talking about because we frequently fall prey to that. We become anxious, have anxiety and worry and stress because we're thinking through, oh my goodness, this isn't going to go well, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to return to the story that we covered on Wednesday because I realized, even though I was planning to move on, that this is exactly what happened to Gideon. So I told the back half of the story very quickly to you on Wednesday. We more looked at the front half of the story about how Gideon was told by God that the very first task he had to do in his newly appointed position as judge of Israel, he gave him a very small job. Go out in the backyard. Your family has built an altar to a false god. I want you to tear the altar down. There's a pole right there. It's a spiritual pole. I want you to tear that pole down. In fact, I want you to cut it up into firewood, put it on the new altar that you build, sacrifice an animal on that altar. And our story told us about how Gideon was afraid of his own family. And so he did it at nighttime. It probably was best anyway to do this at nighttime, frankly, whether he's afraid or not. But he was afraid of his own family and how they would react. It doesn't tell us a lot more about, how he processed that, but you and I know how that goes, right? When you're anxious about the outcome of something, you tend to play it in your mind a lot. It's very interesting to me how it actually went, and that's what I want us to look at today. So let's look at our scriptures in Judges chapter 6. Right here is where he did what the Lord told him to do, and in yellow, because he was afraid of his family and the townspeople, he did it at night rather than in the daytime. How did it turn out? In some ways, exactly as he anticipated, and in a very key way, not at all the way he anticipated. In the morning, when the people of the town got up, there was Baal's, people pronounce it all a different way, Baal's altar demolished with the Asherah pole beside it cut down and the second bull sacrificed on the newly built altar. And they asked each other who did this. And when they carefully investigated, they were told Gideon, son of Joash, did it. And the towns and the people of the town demanded of Joash, bring out your son. He must die. He must die because he's broken down Baal's altar and cut down the Asherah pole beside it. I want to pause here before we get to the surprising part of this. And I want you to understand this is very key to understanding. Like, if you struggle with the Old Testament and places where God said to the Israelites, I want you to wipe these people out, don't spare anybody, those are hard to take in our modern setting and to understand in our modern setting the way we view life and tolerance and all those things. And we, many people tend to come to very negative evaluation, but they're failing to see it in the broader picture and from God's perspective. When you reject God, it often starts this way. It doesn't start out as outright rejection of God. You have your faith in God, and then you subtly, maybe don't even realize it, you add other stuff to it, other spirituality to it, um, other beliefs to it. And then pretty soon, God and your new beliefs that you're trying to have side by side. One's small and one's big. And pretty soon what happens is God's part, the true and living God, and your faith and obedience in him shrinks down, and the other thing becomes big. And then eventually you want to do away with God, the God that you knew, and only want to follow this. And at first, you're willing to live with the people around you that still believe in this God that you're rejecting. I'm not speaking to you. I'm speaking to society, because this is what we see happening in North American society today. Okay, so at first, they're willing to live alongside, but then eventually, there's a demand that everyone has to actually believe this. And if you stand against this new God, this new spirituality, they will attack you. This is just the way human beings are. This is the way of a sinful heart that ultimately rejects the true and living God. First, it tries to have them coexist together, and then it shrinks God down and tries to have the other spirituality grow bigger. Eventually, it casts God out of the picture, and eventually, it will want to attack the people of God. This is the people of God doing this. This isn't the Midianites. This is not foreigners. This is actually the Jewish people who were given the scriptures, who were given all the wonderful acts of God in their history, in their lives. And they tried to first have both worlds, and now they are at a place where they want to kill the very person that God sent to help bring them back to where they belong. Their hearts became so hard. This is what was true of all the people around Israel in that day. When God said to them, and you read it somewhere where you have to go and wipe these people out, it's not because God is a hateful, unreasonable, mean-hearted God. It's because the people over there have so rejected him and their hearts have become so hard that the only answer at this point is they have to be done away with. Because if you try to tolerate the two together, this is where you land in our story. This is the people of God turning on the people of God who are trying to live for God the way God called them. Gideon, in his mind, was sure it was going to be his own family that would turn on him. This is the thing that caught my eye. He thought it would be his own family as well as the townspeople. And so he was afraid. Step back into the story. This is his dad now. They've demanded that his dad hand him over to be killed. He must die. But Joash replied to the hostile crowd around him, are you going to plead Baal's case or cause? Are you trying to save him? Whoever fights for him shall be put to death by morning. His dad turns it completely around. If somebody's going to die, it's going to be the people that are opposing Gideon in this moment, not Gideon himself. You are trying to save him. Whoever fights, trying to save Baal, if whoever fights for him shall be put to death by morning. If Baal really is a god, he can defend himself when somebody else breaks down the altar. I want you to think about that for a second. What what Joash is saying to the people is, you've made this god with your own hands. They literally made the idols and the Asherah poles and the altars. They made it all with their own hands. We don't have a God that has been made by hands. He exists and lives independent of us. He's not a physical being or a physical object. It's why we're not allowed to have idols, like representations even of the true and living God, because he's not contained in something made from this world. They made their gods. And Joash is simply saying, if your God is really real, he can defend himself because our God is really real and he can defend himself. But the truth is, your God is not a real God. This is what the argument ultimately is. I don't know what Gideon stirred up in his father. His father had been participating in this, but in this moment, he must have had an epiphany, a revelation. Oh, my son Joash is right. He's calling us back to the true worship of the true God. And so Joash simply says, if your God's real, you don't need to kill him. Baal should be able to kill my son. Let Baal and my son contend with each other. And so the funny thing is, they give him a funny name at the very end of this. If Baal really is a god, he can defend himself when someone breaks down his altar. So because Gideon broke down Baal's altar, they gave him the name Jerub Baal that day, saying, let Baal contend with him. The people gave him this new name. It was actually meant to be derogatory. It was meant to put down Gideon for what he had done. But the truth is, in time, that actually became a badge of honor because in the end, Gideon was found to be following the only true and living God. And all that he had imagined ahead of time about his own family turned out to not be true. His own family turned their hearts to the living God because of his actions and, excuse me, and defended him before the people. Don't let your imagination run wild when you're facing a stressful situation. You don't know how God is going to work. You don't know how God's going to defend you. You don't know what people are going to come to your aid. I don't know either. So don't let our imaginations run wild. Simply rest yourself in God Himself and let the peace of God rule your life as a result. So that's my word for today. We went 2 minutes over, but I trust today's message is a blessing to you. Lord willing, I look forward to seeing you all again on Monday.